Everyone, welcome back to the summit. We have a special featured guest speaker with us, Michelle Dennedy. Will be here talking about corporate compliancy. So, Michelle, it's all yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's so good to have you guys having this chat and having this webinar for everyone. I always like this time shifting thing. As you know, it's global, right? So
Right.
let me give you a brief introduction to myself. I'm sort of I guess an escapee. I don't know what you call me, a graduate of privacy and security land. And I have recently left that world, and I'm currently the chief executive officer for a company called Drumwave. And so we're actually taking all of our knowledge from compliance and the intra-company sense and starting to orchestrate it and looking at the complexities of data from evaluation, understanding how analytics work, understanding how audit works. And so I think that feeds into this discussion that we're going to have today about
Right.
what goes on in corporate landia and how do you wrangle data, wrangle your coworkers, wrangle the regulators, and really come up with a value proposition.
Very wonderful.
So I think maybe we could just start with your take on an overview of building a privacy program, maybe CCPA focused or maybe just privacy in general. But before we do, I want to tell all of the attendees that you were previously the Chief Privacy Officer for Cisco. So you have a lot of experience in the corporate enterprise world, and I think they're going to learn a lot from what you have to say.
Yeah, so my deep dark past in privacy and security, I started life as a patent litigator, actually. I was practicing in New York and then later out here in Silicon Valley, and then moved into privacy. And that's relevant because the way I view the world through that lens began with understanding virtual assets, understanding what is intellectual property that is never owned by one individual, but often shared and gathers value as it's used. So my perspective in privacy and governance starts from that place of understanding that there is a mix of ownership, fundamental human rights, asset planning, and protection. So making my way through all of the data centers. I started off at Sun Microsystems. We were bought by Oracle. I did a stint in sales there. Then I went on to McAfee Intel after that acquisition, and then on to Cisco, building programs along the way from both inside legal as well as from a CTO under the policy leaders, and finally ending up at Cisco under the chief operating officer. So the first thing about looking at how you're going to build your privacy program is thinking through, where do you sit in the world? And what are you bringing to the table? Is it technical expertise from a security lens, an audit lens, law enforcement, HR, marketing, legal? Look at that and look at what you know. That's a good place to start. Now look at your company. What's your context? So we're mentioning the California Consumer Protection Act that's coming into effect in January of 2020. It's one of about 175 different legal schemas out there in the world. But the good news for you is, again, you look around, where does it apply? What I will caution you is my big fashion don't in privacy design, which is, do not ever design your program for one jurisdiction and one jurisdiction only.
Right.
I guarantee you, if that is your fashion design, you will be leaving your back end exposed. Because data lives everywhere on the planet. If you have a 24-hour service network on your app, on your phone, you're probably dealing with some data that's going off to the Far East, to Europe, somewhere that's going to cover the globe during their 9 to 5 hours of management. If you're selling on the internet, almost inherently, you've got to be looking at things beyond CCPA, looking at what's going on in Las Vegas, looking at what's going on in Canada, in Europe, etc. So tip number one, focus your efforts on what is your company doing with its data? What does it want to be doing? What does it think it's doing? And what might be happening to that data from a risk perspective? So that's sort of thing number one.
Okay.
So I think that's a good segue into one of our questions we had, which is, how do you handle multi legislative compliance? When you're dealing with, all right, I've got to be compliant with CCPA and I have to be compliant with the New York
Right.
regulations and the new Nevada. How do you build out a program that covers all of them?
So you start with foundational principles. So we've decided that we're going to look at our company and say, I'm a consumer-focused company. I'm using a lot of telephony to get my messages out. I've got a workforce that comes to the office on a pretty regular basis, but I have some work-from-home workers. You're starting mapping out what you're going to do about that. Now you go back to core principles. The OECD principles, the Fair Information Practice principles, are the underpinnings of every law on the planet. Go back to basics. Notice, choice, access, data flow, cross-border, security, audit. All of these things will underpin all of those types of laws. So we wrote a book actually with my dad. I love that I'm talking to a father-son duo. I wrote with my dad a book called The Privacy Engineer's Manifesto. And the first third of the book is exactly this. How do you deal in a multi-jurisdictional and evolving world? We published the book in 2014 when GDPR was still something we were negotiating. If you go to basic principles, you will have a lot more flexibility. So start there. Start with understanding from your technical teams, from your operational teams, from your organizational teams, what is happening in your world that handles access. Where do you need consent? Where are you getting consent? After you've gone through that first pass of basics, so that you have at least an articulated and documented fair information principles-based program, now you can refine. Now you're talking to your internal and your external attorneys, and you're saying, is there something special? Am I directing my type of sale to children? What is a child? A child is sometimes 12, a child is sometimes 16, depending where you are in the world. Does that require parental permission? Or is there a way that we're just going to have a bulk type of display rather than an interactive collection about children? You have that sort of interrogation about every types of data project. So I want you, instead of thinking about how am I going to comply with this law,
Right.
how am I going to run a data project? How am I going to curate value? Because there's only two things. You're creating value or you're creating risk.
Right.
There is no stasis that says you're doing nothing. So as long as you're in business and you're collecting data, if you've got customers and employees, you got a data privacy issue. So if you have any person that's still coming to you, and I still get them all the time, oh, we're B2B. We don't have to think about CCPA.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you cute? Oh my God. If you have employees and you have customers or you want to have customers, congratulations. You have to deal with people data and you've got a privacy.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So on to the next question. When you're
we're really like two now.
When you're working on building these programs out, I've seen some of your talks. You've given TED Talks. I've seen talks with Cisco, and you talk about privacy by design. So Can you talk about how important that is, privacy by design, with privacy and security in mind, rather than building out an IT program and trying to retrofit?
Yeah, I mean, and of course I am deeply, deeply biased. And so let me take a quick step back and sort of definitionally, let's get clear. So privacy by design is the public policy. It is the policy that says privacy should not be a zero-sum game. It shouldn't be security or privacy. It shouldn't be profitability or privacy. It shouldn't be convenience or privacy. It is the notion that you can design in privacy from the beginning. That's a public policy. The reason we called privacy engineering is going back to the basic definition, not of technology and gadgets and things, but engineering is really the act of looking around at the tools available and solving a problem, often through the use of technology and tools, but not necessarily so. Sometimes engineering, if you think about building a structure, is using a power tool and driving a screw into an object. Is that wood? Is it metal? What kind of metal? What kind of strength does it need? What kind of environment? Context matters in building in the real world. Context matters if you are a privacy engineer. So think through, your privacy by design is your goal. That is your outcome and your objective. And you should have a number of initiatives and measurements that say, are we or are we not close to that, getting to that goal? Privacy engineering is everything else that you do. It's how you build, it's how you measure, it's the decisions that you're making about the standards bodies that you're going to look at as measurements. So think about privacy engineering as absolutely core to building any information-based system. Now, security by design is the sister. Security is all the ways you keep the bad guys out and the good guys in, and make sure that the integrity of the information is there. It's not as easy as a 1, 2, 3, but that's the gist of it. Privacy is the context. So if you're building that bridge again, and you're building it out of wood, you're probably not building it across and creating a large river or ocean inlet like the Golden Gate Bridge. You probably want to reach for a different piece of metal. That's your security protocol. So if I'm doing some sort of a system where you are giving me your credit information, your health information, information about your location, and I'm doing it over the wire, I want to protect that information with my virtual steel. I want to have security that's proportionate to that type of sharing. If instead you're coming to a static web page and you're just viewing it, and I'm collecting anonymous clicks of how many people have looked at my stuff, then that's a different security conversation, isn't it? So understanding how security and privacy by design are two different things, but they are absolutely conjoined. I have seen again and again and again how security people, because they've been around for a lot longer and they have bigger budgets because they do more tangible things, they will say, there, it's encrypted, so privacy is done. Lucky you. And I'm thinking, well, it's really interesting because you are the technology guy, and technically I'm not the technology guy, and yet I'm reading these words in the clear.
Yeah.
What does that say about your encryption, my love? So these designs, when they're done together, it helps you to get into whatever creation cycle you're in, whether you're talking about vendor management and buying a tool, or whether you're talking about co-creation, whether you're using agile, waterfall, DevSecOps. Just like if you try to secure things after they're already built, it becomes a lot more difficult. Same thing if you try to do security first and then add on those requirements that are very complicated, that cover many, many jurisdictions, and may require you to do things that don't sound logical to you. Who would have thought that an IP address comprehensively in every circumstance is deemed personal information? Guess who guessed that? Privacy people.
Yeah.
Is it insane? Yes, it's insane. We know it's insane. We knew it was insane when the law was enacted. We warned our security brethren that it was coming, and they kept saying, but oftentimes an IP address simply addresses, a mailbox that's serving thousands of people. I can't find any one person. And my response again, I think I've been spending too much time in the Deep South, is how nice. It's on board. So if you didn't plan for it, now we've got an expensive problem on our hands where you're trying to truncate the last octet, or you're trying to dump a bunch of data that you do need for security processing.
Right.
You want to know the full IP address of addresses that are spewing out malware. And so now you're in conflict. If you're planning ahead of time, you can say to the privacy regulators, as well as the folks who are looking at your security profiles, this is why we're collecting the entire IP address. This is how we're cornering off that risk data from anything that is serving a customer, doing surveillance, figuring out the where, what, why, and who of an actual individual, whether that's an employee or a customer.
Okay.
Very good explanation.
Very good.
And so I guess sort of similar along the lines of what you're just talking about, the risk. In one of your videos, you made a statement previously that data is not neutral. Data causes risk. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it's something that I was saying probably with Robin Wilton years ago, who's an identity guru out there, that I look at data, and particularly data that identifies a person, whether or not you own it. Think about it like nuclear data. Like once you've got that radial marker on it, you're in it to win it, baby. So it's something that you have to decide before you ingest information. It's very hard to prove that you don't have information.
Right.
Very hard to get it out once you do have it and it's replicating. So planning in the beginning and understanding that you've got this radioactivity running through your systems. Are you lining those pipes with lead to prevent the radioactivity? Now that doesn't mean that energy isn't valuable energy. You simply have to plan for it. And I think the biggest mistake that we have, and if you really look at root cause analysis of a lot of the major breaches out there, they emanated from spear phishing. Sure, you need to educate people, but I've fallen prey. We did an internal one last year at Cisco when I was still there, and it was your Amazon package delivery is here. I clicked on that bitch and I'd click on it again. I'm not gonna lie. It was Christmas and Mama got to get her gifts. So they sent me the shame on me thing, and they were like, "Oh, we bagged a big one with the CPO." It was so embarrassing. You need to plan for that. You need to plan for spear phishing, but you also need to understand how the system works and where the architecture is flowing and not flowing. And so you're not flowing the pipes that have the at-risk energy into a place where no one's watching. So when you look at these root cause analysis, yes, you get those, clever bunnies who are going to come in through the front and the side and the windows and the cracks. But more importantly, look at the people who have left you. Look at the projects that former executives were running. Did you ever delete all that data? Is there a database for a project that was EOL'd and suddenly you've got 10 years of customer data just sitting around? What's going on in your contracts? Were they always digitized and you were always protecting that header data and that tax ID data?
Right.
Credit cards. There's PCI for the ones that are there today, but what about those former programs? Or what about the weird ones? Like maybe you're in the business of selling large systems and software, but you also run major conferences, and maybe you help pay for people's hotel rooms. What are you doing with that data? Do you have their credit cards? Do you know where people were staying and when their flights are coming and going? This is pretty hot stuff, but it's not core to your business. That's the kind of stuff that I always keep an eye out for. That's, getting back to the Target and some of these other breaches. An HVAC vendor coming in, having access to live cords and being able to tap literally into your pipeline. That's the kind of stuff you're constantly thinking creatively. You're constantly thinking, where is that data flowing? And that comes back to that notion of data is always radioactive.
Right.
Right. And I think we come from the security side with that. We're always telling our clients to think like the attacker. I just finished a pen test within the last week, and I was able to browse a SharePoint site and start pulling down little bits of data. And then I have to get them to understand how I can use your list of Windows 7 machines, how I can use this list of servers, how I can use this building floor plan, et cetera, and piece this together to make an attack.
Exactly. And think about how these small bits and bytes, none of the things that you've said sound terribly personal.
Exactly.
And so if your guide is, it's not that personal, we don't have to worry about it, that's a red flag for people like me.
Right. Or the employee directory that's accessible on the internet to anyone.
Right, exactly.
Badge numbers are there. Hey, look at me, hack me.
We totally agree with that one.
We get it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was one too. What are your thoughts about asset value of data? Negative risk and positive risk.
Bill, you're singing my song. I'm loving you so hard right now. So it's funny you should say that. I got a whole company working on that now. So I think that, it's not my idea. I'm going to go back and stand on the shoulders of giants. Grace Hopper said in 1965 that asset that the data asset information would one day be on the corporate balance sheet, because in most cases it is more valuable than the hardware that processes it. Now, when she said that, and she said that data was more valuable than the hardware that processes it, let's think about what was going down in 1965. The hardware she was talking about was not commoditized laptops or small gadgets, multi-million-dollar machines, equipment, large HVAC systems, and still she had the vision to say that it's the data that is the reason. So data as value and data as currency is difficult to monetize, except in the one niche area. Whenever you talk about monetizing data, people assume you're talking about advertising. Yes, we have attached a monetary number to being able to push an ad to a type of person. That is one type of informational story. However, I think in the future, we'll figure out that data privacy, and we define it as this in the Privacy Manifesto, privacy is not secrecy. Privacy is the authorized sharing and processing of personally identifiable information according to moral, ethical, legal, and sustainable principles. So if you break down that definition into pieces of value, think about having a data story where you're a job seeker and out there's someone who has exactly the right job for you. Connecting those dots, valuable. It's not just someone wanting to buy something. What if you're someone seeking a certain piece of information and you're looking for a specialist, and somehow that specialty information is either searchable or there's some sort of an intelligence that allows it to find you? Value.
Right.
What if you have stores and stores of data that give you trends or allow you to explore new ways of looking at the relationship you have with your existing customers that are always cheaper to have than buying and acquiring new customers?
Right.
Value. So I think as we put together these little data stories and we are able to start manipulating them, visualizing them, storing them, and working with these data stories with morality, ethics, legality, and sustainability, that's when we're going to start walking up that mountain of data is truly an asset.
Right, right. Interesting concept, because I think some people on the other side look at it as, if I lost that data, what is the value? Not really the other way around, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and we actually did quite a bit on this when I was back at Cisco. If you go to trust.cisco.com, we did a 18 country survey based. So it's survey based. It's correlation, not causation. But we actually were comparing the downside, which is now, as you say, Bill, there are actuarial tables on cyber risk and insurance. That didn't exist until about 2005, were the first actuarial tables based on a guess. So, Larry Poneman, I love him, sat on his board for years for the responsible information management. His risk number is $200 per record. How did we come up with that number? At that time, we were forced through California, 1386, to report our breaches. So we started having numbers of breaches, and we have contacts within the legal and the PR and the recovery and the security, and we say, so here we've got 10 million records lost, and we have how many millions of dollars of recovery? Aha, we're going to use the math and call that $200 per record. That was the basis of starting to measure how much does it cost you to recover. Now that we're getting more and more lawsuits, we're getting more pieces of legislation with real fines and real teeth attached, we're refining that downside risk number all the time.
Right.
My question and my pushback, because there's a lot of people working on that downside number, is exactly as you say, Bill, what's the upside? Why would I take a $10 million risk if there wasn't at least a 10 million or more return?
Right.
To me, that means that data is pretty powerful, and not just if you lose it.
Interesting. Okay.
So sort of a little switch. Can we talk about data sovereignty and where we're headed with, one of your talks you gave was about data locations when you have data multi-jurisdictional, and trying to address, of course, lots of laws and the data sovereignty issue. Where do you see us heading?
Yeah, oh, data sovereignty.
Where would you like to see us heading?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think these places that are attempting to do requirements to have jurisdictional control and limits are really tricky. It's one thing if you say, what is the impact on a jurisdiction's citizens? That's different. We have laws that have covered that type of harm and risk that go back hundreds of years. So if I sell a pair of shoes and I know I'm mailing them to Maine, I can expect that someone from Maine could take action if those shoes were harmful or defective or whatever. We don't have that simple math for data just yet. So it's really interesting to look at it and say, oh, data has to stay in Delaware. Delaware's not that big. What do you do if it's raining in Delaware? What about resiliency? So I don't mean to pick on anyone from Delaware. I love you. Good beaches, great power. A lot of time in Delaware. But I think the same goes for if I'm Liechtenstein and I want banking data to only stay in Liechtenstein. If I'm Switzerland, I'm not a part of the European Union. But data is obviously going to come in and out of my jurisdiction. Those are the easier ones because they're similar legal schemas and you can have agreements. So your lawyers are going to have to do a little bit of complexity. Where it gets trickier is where you get into different perspectives on ownership and fiduciary care. So for example, in the Far East, and we'll go back to intellectual property for a moment. And in my mind, think to yourself, oh, she's thinking of privacy as a type of intellectual property. It's a value of the mind, of your reputation, of your internal well-being, of your emotions. Like privacy is like a glob of intellectual property. Let's look at something that is a little better known. So let's think about patents and copyrights within the PRC. You may say, oh, those people are stealing stuff. They copy. They're bad people. Well, the reality is, if you were born and bred and had 3,000 years of collectivism, you may look across the pond and go, wait a minute, these people want to own drugs that will cure health conditions for the whole of mankind? Bad people, selfish, thieving, scummy, greedy people. So if you just point fingers at each other and go, my data is safer here, my data is safer there, we don't get anywhere. What we have to do is realize like these perspectives do exist. And so the reality is, and I'm not going to be so naive to say like, oh, you just tell them that it's like, I'm from California and hold my data as if I was a Californian. We know better. We know better. You have to say what the rules are. So if you're driving in a place where they drive on the left, you can be as passionate as you want about driving on the right. You're going to get hit. Think about when you're thinking about sovereignty and jurisdictionality. If you truly need, for whatever reason, to keep information within a certain jurisdiction, you have a lot of work to do. So we go back to the beginning of this conversation. What absolutely needs to be within that sphere of control? And I would limit it. You guys are security people, so you want to limit it and lock it down. You want to know who's accessing it. You want to think about old-timey, delicious notions like containers. Love containers. Kubernetes came out. They're like, Kubernetes. I'm like, oh, you mean containers? Like, that's been a thing for a while. Go back to that old-timey architecture and say, how are we accessing this? How are we logging this? How are we limiting this? How are we destroying this from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? Right now, today, it is potentially possible that you can send encrypted globs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. My prediction within 5 years, that's not going to be an available excuse. So if you're going to plan to run for the next 5 years and explode, have at it, only rely on encryption. If instead you're building for sustainability and you're building for growth, you want to think about how are you actually granularizing and understanding your information on a much deeper level. Maybe you do what we did when it was outsourced Palooza. Instead of sending everything for development into one place and one time and giving them the kernel, maybe you give people different projects and you glue them together back at headquarters. Creates complexity, which inherently escalates your security and your compliance risk. But at the end of the day, you have a very clear point of view and perspective on how you're actually protecting the consumer. So whether that's in California or whether that's in Europe or Canada or eventually, knock on wood, we'll get some sort of federal bill that makes sense here in the United States. Now you're figuring out how you're going to show the regulator of a future that's now looking back at you and saying, naughty boy. You say, this is my plan, this is the context, this is the execution, this is how I budgeted, and this is how I managed it. And even if you get tagged because your information did travel, or it was lost, or it was compromised in some way, or you miscommunicated in some way and told someone's data story incorrectly, chances are the damages will be a lot less severe than had you not gone into that complexity. So I don't want to make light of jurisdictional issues, but I think this is where you really think about segmentation, understanding how, like, mechanically, physically, technologically, that data is going to flow through its entire life cycle, and then figuring out, can you live with that, or do you need to figure out a different way so that you're tracking and caring for provenance? Just like you would any sort of, great painting, you want the provenance because that's going to continue to enhance the value of that data asset.
Interesting concept. Very interesting.
And
it's kind of fun.
Kind of a good segue. So as companies start doing this and implementing these privacy programs, it's obvious that consumers are much more aware of the need for privacy, at least some of them. All the mega breaches lately, it's definitely something people are aware now. So for a PR point of view, how do companies go about demonstrating to their customers that they care about privacy? It's kind of every breach, when you get the announcement from the company you're doing business with, they say, we care about your privacy. You almost say, no, you don't. Or we care about your security, and say, no, you don't.
Yeah.
So how do companies demonstrate to their customers that they do care?
Yeah, it's that's the money question, right? And I think it's part of the debate in this whole California Consumer Protection Act or Privacy Act. It's fascinating because we're sort of going back to the future. The question today is the opt-out and do not sell button. How big should it be? Where does it go? Should it be like cookie announcements? Because those were so great at delighting our customers. Yeah, that works. So thank you, legislature. So the question is that who, what, why, and where. And inevitably, when you're talking, particularly in a legal setting, people are saying, well, what can I get away with? How small can I make it? How can I get away? And my reaction is to go back to my own experience. Back in 2000, there was a huge debate within my company. Do we post a privacy policy? Which sounds ridiculous now. I mean, you have to have one, right? And it's absurd to think that you wouldn't. But in that time, it was not required. And as soon as you did, you were subject to the Federal Trade Commission's jurisdiction. That was a big deal, because if you don't do what you're saying in that policy, and it's still true today, then there's a case against you under the Fairness Act or misrepresentation, even worse. So you have to be fair. You have to be allowing for non-discriminatory behavior, all sorts of things that you have to put in your policy. Since you're stuck with it, you're stuck with the button, you're stuck with your policy, I think the way forward is to make the most of it. Use language that is inviting. use ways and means. You know, when I was at Intel, we did a little dorky ninja as our privacy policy. We did a graphic novel. I knew that the products from McAfee were very complicated. It's hard for people to understand all the ways that security technology has to look at what you're doing on your mobile devices and laptops and things. And it sounds really scary. So instead we said, we've got the 16-page document, single spaced, and we put it on the bottom of every page for the privacy purists. 1% of you out there, we love you. Or 99%, the rest of you, we did an interactive graphic novel so that you could at least have a fighting chance of asking us the right questions, of hopefully not just informing, but maybe even entertaining and delighting your customer, so that before they hear the first thing from privacy shouldn't be after a breach when you say, we care about your privacy. Because the reaction is like, really? I'm buying it. That's like the breakup line of like, it's not you, it's, it's you.
So basically you're saying humanize it a little bit more.
Make it beautiful. Write a song. Make it smell, come out of the computer and say, I'm doing a healthcare app. I'm squirting some alcohol up your guzzle. Get in the mindset of it. You know, make it something so that, you know, you have the opportunity to really have a point of view. And it can be like, listen, we're going to have a serious talk. Like, before we get all on this Tinder app, let's have a conversation about this. Right. That could be hilarious. In fact, if the Tinder CPO is on right now, call me. I have ideas for your privacy policy, and it would be hilarious. And you do want to be, you know, you want to talk to the customer you want to have.
Right.
So if you're going to be flip and silly and fun about it, you probably don't want it on, you know, Intel's corporate website.
Right.
If you're McAfee and you're a consumer business who's married to Intel at the time, they're separate companies again, it was totally appropriate to have a consumer-facing based goofy ninja cartoon policy. Now, mind you, that's not to say, and shouldn't be mistaken for, it shouldn't be absolutely complete. We actually went line by line of our 16-page policy and made sure every single concept was either written or depicted clearly on our graphic novel. It's really important to get the facts clear first, and then you can have fun.
Right.
But if you started your privacy architecture, as we started at the top of the hour, really understanding what your brand ethic is, what your ethical risk is, you know, where's your moral barriers, and the question I always ask every internal executive, do you care about privacy? Because the answer is not always yes. And if your answer from your executive isn't yes, and it's no, but we got to do it, that's an entirely different internal charm and disarm campaign that I'm going to run.
Right.
If, like Chuck Robbins at Cisco, he says, not only did he follow my script when he was at Davos, but he also said that privacy is a fundamental human right. Now, I no longer work for that dude, but I would again, because he does care about privacy. It's a different depiction if you've got that guy. It doesn't mean everything's wine and roses, because you got plenty of people down in the core think smarter than everything else. But understand and interrogate every person who is a data steward. Do you, if you had to write that letter to your mother about this breach that you've had, do you care about privacy? And if the answer is no, then we're going to lock it down and we're going to limit access to data, because we don't want to have any missteps that cost us millions, if not billions of dollars. If the answer is yes, and I want to get to know my employees, yes, and I want to have an ongoing relationship and not just periodic observations of consumers or customers, then we're going to get, that's part of your brand. And that's when you also, for privacy and security professionals, I don't know about y'all, but I never had an unlimited budget. Revealed. But guess who does? Marketing. How do those guys afford in a recession people on trapezes at the customer conference? So I go to my trapeze artists and I say, okay, people who have budget for a trapeze, people in Cirque du Soleil, you say you care about data, you want to get down and dirty with me. I'm not just going to come in when I'm telling you how to do the policy. Now we're going to take some of that delicious budget, we're going to apply it to this California issue we got going on, and we're going to delight the crap out of our customers. And then you go, thank you.
And it could give you a competitive advantage for your customers who do care.
Eventually this will commoditize. Right now, privacy is not a commodity.
Yeah, it's not. And it's a definite barrier as you look around, meaning, yes, it's something that we all should be concerned about. It's very important, but just what you were saying there's a definite barrier that we got to get across,
Yeah, and it's, and it's everywhere. I mean, you hear it from billionaires, you hear it from people in the PTA, it's just so overwhelming. Like there's so many ways that the government and even my parking lot can spy on me. Is privacy dead? Like my car is spying on me now. Is privacy dead? And the answer constantly, for me anyway, has to be that privacy has always been about telling a story with integrity. And if that's important to you, I think it should be important to you. And there's things that we can do about it, and there's things that we can demand.
Right.
I'm glad you said that. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. What do you say to people who say privacy is dead? Because I get that from people. I was just talking to someone last night, won't say who.
They're everywhere.
They were signing up for some coupon website. And I said, why are you doing that? I would never do that. And their response was, my data's already out there. What should I worry about now?
Well, so the data already out there thing, I think is so fascinating, because it's kind of like, okay, well, if your data's already out there and you can't change anything about it, why aren't you wearing a perm and a mullet? That's what I was rocking in 1982. Like, you create new data, new personas, different stories every single day. And the same thing with, the other side of it is, oh, we've already complied with GDPR. We don't need to do California. Well, I ate yesterday. I'm going to eat again today, and maybe even tomorrow. You're going to have to keep doing this, and that's just how it is. And the other thing, I think the other thing too, to be as kind and gentle as I can to people is, I think there is a big mistake just because of the lexicography. Privacy sounds like not being naked, right? It sounds like secrecy or hiding things, rather than it's really kind of a mind switch to think that privacy is us doing this webinar. You can see my face. I'm getting to know you guys. I love this whole son and dad vibe thing. Like, there's a lot of information being shared. None of this has anything to do with secrecy.
Right.
But the fact that the story is being told, the fact that your relationship makes you have that much more credibility, the fact that, there's an old lady here waxing on about stuff, all of that stuff is information that is about human beings that should be told with integrity. That is privacy, not just, can a hacker come in and turn on my camera after we finish this call? That's like the least interesting piece about it for me.
Right. It's controlling your story, how you want to be presented.
Yep. And participating in it. I think that privacy really is kind of modern day democracy. Are you exercising your rights? We have a right to vote in the US, and I think even in the most volatile election we had, 45% of people even turned up. How many people are turning up for privacy?
Right.
We need a lot more than 40%. And right now we probably have 2%, which means upside for me. I'm a businesswoman now. That's 98% growth, babe.
So that's all the questions we have. If any of the attendees are interested in finding out more about you, your company, et cetera, could you tell them where to find you?
Yeah, I'm the most findable privacy person. In fact, you can ask all of my former PR people who are like, shut it down. So I am at Twitter at @mdennedy, Dennedy. It's a typo. There's a longer story there, but yeah, M Dennedy. That's my Twitter handle. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on pretty much every social media. We've got a podcast called the Privacy Sigma Writers. My last episode aired in April. Sorry, we're a little slow getting going again, but we will get that back going probably just under Sigma Writers, since our company is much more comprehensive than just privacy. And then you can check out my company at drumwave.com. It's drum and then wave as in wrangling your data, analyzing your data, creating value with your data, and exploring your data.
Great.
Data
Wonderful.
Drum
That's
wave.
great.
I just said data wave. Bad CEO. Someone call my boss.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to
Yes.
answer our questions, and we think it's going to be very, very useful for the attendees.